Hi, everybody. If you don't already know me, I'm Shaylee Hugendorn. We're doing a vlog series called Sisters in Mental Illness. I have bipolar 2, and I've spoken about that before. We'll link to that. And I'm really excited to talk to other women and just connect and hear their stories. I just truly believe that that's the only way we're going to smash this stigma, is by telling our stories. And today I am the most excited because I have one of my very first Vancouver friend that I could share with and be vulnerable with. And I'm excited you get to meet her. Her name is Lalainia. She's an actress and a singer and a director, a mom of 2. She is married and she is hilarious. So I'm really excited. I'm going to let her talk and ask her how she knew she needed help and leading up to getting her diagnosis. So I would just love to hear and share with everybody your story, Lainey.
For sure. Well, I was diagnosed in the middle of my 20s with clinical depression and anorexia. And what sort of led me up to that diagnosis was that I think I was a pretty normal teenager, normal kid. Definitely, I would even have called myself an optimist. And as I was going through high school, definitely started noticing some perfectionism issues, and not just in, say, like school or even about my body, but in particular, I was what I started calling a moral perfectionist. So I was a Christian, and I really wanted, I wanted to change the world for God. When I was 8 years old, I remember telling my camp counselor that I wanted to be an evangelist. You know, that was my lifelong goal, was to be an evangelist. And so I think that kind of carried with me. And I wanted to not just be a Christian, but I think I misunderstood, and I thought I needed to be Jesus to other people, which of course, you know, is impossible. And so for me, I kind of started along this path, you know, making sure I was reading my Bible, making sure I was going out of my way to be kind to people. But what started happening was, obviously nobody is perfect, and I was far from. And so anything that, especially morally, that I did that maybe was questionable, or that I thought wasn't kind enough or wasn't loving enough, I would be really hard on myself. And so the perfectionism was sort of creeping into that side of my life. And I think because I was so hard on myself, because I was pursuing this, you know, perfectionism, my mood really started to drop. There's only so long you can, you know, go along in your life and be trying to live your life, and also, you know, be hard on yourself, berate yourself, tell yourself that you're weak or lazy or stupid, you know, really terrible internal dialogue. And obviously it's going to affect your mood. And so it really did start to affect my mood. But at the time, I didn't know why. I had no clue. It wasn't like I was very conscious of the fact that I was hard on myself. I thought that was the way I was supposed to be. I also thought that was the way everybody was. So I only had my own experience. And for me, that experience was telling me, you know, you're not a great person. Like, you got a lot to work on. But it really started affecting my mood. So eventually what I started doing was, okay, I gotta wake up and I gotta feel positive. How am I gonna do this? Instead of like turning, you know, in my weakness and going, you know, I have to just learn to accept myself the way I am and allow God to sort of like speak into my life. Instead of doing that, what I did was, you know what, like, there's got to be something I can do where I can feel proud of myself. And food was one of those things. So at the time, there was a big low-fat movement. And I thought, you know what, that really makes sense. You really should be eating healthier. And so I kind of grabbed onto that and, decided, I remember there was a guy on the radio, he's like 20 grams of fat and under. Like nobody should have more than 20 grams of fat ever. So, so I started like obsessively looking at packages and making sure I was getting under the 20 grams. He had this weird obsession with something called wheat berries. And so I was on the wheat berry bandwagon. I'm like, oh, yum, these are so good. And it was like, they were completely tasteless. I put a lot of cinnamon in them when I would make them, but it did not help. So here I was on this low fat bandwagon. And you know what? The strange thing is that I actually would start to feel better about myself. I'd start my day. I'd be like, oh, I'm eating healthy, so in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem was as I would have day after day after day of, I didn't eat that and I was strong, again, it had this moral connotation. I would look at food and I would think, no, I'm not going to eat that. And that makes me a better person, instead of going, oh, I'm not going to eat that. Oh, okay. You know what? I could have a little bit of that. And then, it's still healthy. No, there was just like a cut line. I don't eat it. And I remember trying to explain it to my family when it had gotten out of control. And the only way I could explain it was that eventually what I did was I made eating a sin. And of course, nobody wants to sin. So in a way, when I would not eat, then I would feel like I had a moral victory. And so I could feel okay about myself because, see, I'm not weak. I'm not giving into the world. It was completely flipped on its head, simply because genuinely, I was not telling anybody. I was married now at the time, so it started younger. I got married. It just evolved. And I have said to a lot of people, you don't ever plan on getting an eating disorder. It's not something you plan. What happens is it's just this step-by-step, slow process. The bar just gets raised higher and higher. I went from low fat to no fat, then to like, it was at the time, like there was a diet called the Zone diet. And it was like, oh, the Zone. Okay. So I've actually been wrong. Like it's not just about low fat or no fat. It's actually like carbohydrates are the enemy. So it's like, so if I just eat protein, and cut out it doesn't matter, what the diet was. It was like, if I wasn't doing it, then I wasn't strong enough. And again, I wasn't moral enough. I wasn't godly enough. I wasn't able to stop myself from doing, something that was so wrong, like eating. And so, so it just, it took off very quickly, and a huge reason. And I often, anyone I sit down and talk to, I'm always willing to talk to anybody about their struggle with an eating disorder. And basically what, it's to the point where I go, I'm not happy. Like, I'm genuinely not happy. And you can look and you can go, well, you're not eating, so of course you're not happy. So let's fix the food thing and then you'll be happy. But really once I was diagnosed and started the process, you can look back and you go, oh no, I wasn't happy first. Like that's what happened. I wasn't happy first. And I didn't have a language to communicate that. I didn't think it was okay to be unhappy. Like my life looked really good on the outside. The year I was diagnosed was my most successful career year that I had had. I had had, I think, 3 different guest starring roles. My husband and I had been able to buy a townhouse, like we had sort of a lovely picture of success. And so how do you find the language to go, yeah, but I'm just not happy when I wake up, And so the food and manipulating my food and just focusing on that gave me something when my life, my mood and everything was spinning out of control, it was like, okay, but I can control this. This is what I can control. And so for me, it was a disease about control. It was, it started with the depression, moved into how do I self-medicate? Well, I didn't try drugs. I didn't do alcohol, but I had my own addiction, which was obsessing about food and calories and looking at packages. And eventually I slid down to where I was only eating 20 calories a day. So I was doing a cup of lettuce in the morning and a cup of lettuce mixed greens. Because there was far more vitamins in mixed beans, because I was, really concerned about my health still. And so I would do a cup of lettuce in the morning, cup of lettuce in the evening, and then that left 4 calories. So that was 16 calories. And so I would allow myself 4 diet pops, because there was a calorie to each. And so sometimes I would freeze the diet pop so that the ice felt like it was more, I could break it up and chop it up. And so that's what happened. It was like the bar just kept going higher and higher and higher. And I kept going, it wasn't anymore, I'm not going to eat that cookie. It was like, how long in my day can I wait before I eat something? Like, how long can I wait? And then that day just gets longer and longer. And then, you crash and you grab something and they're just like, wow, I suck. Like I totally lost control there. Wow. Okay. We got to go extreme now. You got to show, like, it just, it's so hard to explain to people who've never, never experienced it. And yet I think we all, at some point in our lives, whether it's with technology, our iPhones, or, with exercise or food or working, we're all looking for something to make ourselves feel accomplished and capable in this often ridiculously scary world, and so I think even though some people can't relate to me using food to make myself feel better, I can tell you it's the exact same thing as any other addiction that you can find. We just want to find something. We wake up in the morning feeling crappy. How can I make myself feel better? I'm going to pursue this. I'm going to constantly surf on the net and talk, get in conversations on Facebook and, whatever it is that sort of floats your boat, right? It's like we end up using that and it just gets out of control. So long story short, I ended up crashing. There's only so long you can live off of 20 calories a day. And my body started depleting. And I started getting chest pains when I would do my runs. And my mom, who's a nurse, was like, I'm like, oh, I'm getting this like sort of pain here. And I was like, that doesn't sound good. I'm like, oh, I think I just pulled a muscle. I did yoga at the time too, so I had all these like reasons and excuses why, I'm totally fine and I'm very healthy. And my mom's like, I'd really like you to check that out. I'm like, okay, fine. I shouldn't have mentioned anything. And so I went to the doctor, and this doctor was amazing. She was beyond thorough. And I still, to this day, credit a huge part of saving my life to this doctor, because I think she was very instinctual, and right away she had sort of a feeling. She was looking at me, hearing my story a little bit, asking about my mood. And she even asked, in my first appointment, is there any history of eating disorder or in your family or you? And me, of course, I was like, I love food, which of course is true at the time because you're completely obsessed with food because you're starving. And so that was always in my mind, like, I love food. Like, I can't stop thinking about it because I'm not eating it. And so she did a bunch of tests, and I remember just going, whatever, like, I'm fine. And I got a call that she wanted me to come in. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever had like blood tests or anything and then them say, can you come in and we'll review them? It's always just like, oh yeah, it's normal. So I was like, okay, that's very strange. And then the day I was supposed to go in to see her, something happened that like really freaked me out, which was I was picking up my niece from the airport and was coming in to visit. Took her to get some food. Of course, I wasn't hungry because, you know, I'd had my lettuce already in the morning. And so I took her to get some food, and I at the time drank a lot of water. So I was drinking like 6 to 8 liters of water a day because it made me feel, yeah, it was ridiculous. I had, you know, the big water jugs and just, because at least it would give you a feeling of fullness. And I took her to the washroom, and I remember like sitting there and feeling like my bowels or something was like gonna burst. And I was like, what is going on? So I'm like, oh, I just need to go to the washroom. And so I went to the washroom. Don't worry, it's not gross. Well, it's kind of gross. I went to the washroom and basically sat on the toilet. There was like a massive explosion basically that I couldn't control. But the weirdest thing was I turned and looked, and there was nothing there. Like it was literally completely clear. Nothing. Like I remember just looking and just thinking, what just happened? And then turning and looking and going, what? Like, what just happened? And obviously, you know, it was the water, and my body was starting to freak out and going, we've got nothing here, you know, like the water's not going to do anything. And I remember I was kind of funny with it. You know, there was lots of points where my logic would kick in. And if I really saw something that was affecting my health, then it was like, I'm not going to do it. Sounds weird because obviously starving myself was affecting my health. But I would think long term, like, for example, I was like, I tried throwing up and I couldn't. Like I literally tried, because that's kind of your first option when you're so starving, and then you eat, and then you're like, oh, I've got to get this out of my body, and I couldn't do it. So then I'm like, oh, okay, what am I going to do? So then I'm like, I was like, well, I've heard people do laxatives, but then I read up on laxatives and about the long-term damage that it can do. And that really scared me. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do that because I don't want to cause any long-term damage. I do think there was a part of me in my mind and in my heart that was like, this isn't forever. Like I'm doing this to survive right now. I don't want to live like this forever, you know? And so basically what happened was I had that moment in the bathroom, and it freaked me out. Then I went to my appointment that afternoon, and the doctor sat me down and said, so I got your test results. My electrolytes were out of balance, which is very common with eating disorder people and people who are also drinking too much water. And she said, but my concern is your heart rate. So they'd done an ECG, and she said, your heart is beating at 34 beats a minute. And I was like, oh, is that low? And she's like, yeah, it's very, very low. And I said, oh, you know what? Like I do yoga. And so, you know, I think I was just really relaxed when I was getting it done. She's like, you can't really control your heart rate with yoga. She said, if you're anxious, you can lower it with yoga. She said, but she said, that's like almost a 1 beat every 2 seconds. Like she said, normally if someone's heart rate falls under 50, I hospitalize them. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, so we got to figure out why this is happening. Are you sure you don't have, like, are you struggling with food? She said a lot of the symptoms are pointing towards an eating disorder. I'm like, still in the office, you know, I just wasn't ready. My eating disorder was my friend, and it was the only thing that was in my mind keeping me alive at the time. It was sort of what I was living for. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm eating. And she's like, okay. And so you know, A plus B wasn't equaling C as she wanted it to. So she said, okay, we got to run a bunch of more tests. And she was concerned about a bunch of other things like hepatitis and like all this stuff. And I'm like, so she sends me with this big list of tests to go get done. And my guilt kicks in. Like, I just sat in the doctor's office and lied, which at the time, you know, I tried not to lie, but at the same time, you have to kind of like, people don't understand. So I have to, you know, yeah, I'll hide the food that they want me to eat and I'll scoop it into something. And then if they ask me if I ate it, I'll be like, yeah, because, you know, I put a small piece in my mouth or, you know, and so I had been lying and that was really getting to me. And I had this big thing of tests and I'm like, this is bad. Like I'm totally like, I'm living a lie right now. Mm-hmm. And so I waited that night. We're going to bed. I hop in to my husband, right beside my husband, and I go to turn my light off and something just kind of stops me. And I just go, babe, like I'm going to tell him something. And then the only way I can describe it is it was like all of a sudden something just closed my mouth. So I wanted to talk. I wanted to explain to him what was going on and I couldn't. It was, I did a one-woman show about my experience and I had this picture of Keanu Reeves in The Matrix where he's in the Matrix and he's trying to talk and he's going like this and there's like these little pieces, like it's like his mouth is being melded shut by his skin. And that's exactly how it felt like. It felt like I wanted to talk and I couldn't. And so it was very scary and I just started crying and I think it scared my husband a little. We had only been married I think at this point, like a year and a half. I don't even think we've been married 2 years yet. And yeah, it took a good 3 hours. And my husband called my mom, who came over. I think she came over at like 1:30 in the morning or 2 in the morning when I still couldn't speak. And I remember her just saying to Brad, like, let's pray. And me just like sort of listening and I'm crying and it felt like a movie, you know, it was so dramatic and yet it was so out of control, out of my control. And basically they prayed and slowly after 3.5 hours, I said, I think I have an eating disorder. And my mom just said, we know. And it was just like, yeah. And I think at that point I was so relieved. And I think so hoping that was going to be the end of my journey. Like just telling them would be like, yes, okay, awesome. Now I told them it's out. Now I can get better. I remember them saying you need to take some time off work. And I'm like, I'll take 2 weeks, 2 weeks and I'll be back to it. And, everything's going to be okay. But it so was not. That was what I really was doing, was taking the lid off of my depression, and unfortunately an eating disorder is so pervasive and so addictive that you can't even tackle your depression until you deal with the food stuff first, and so I went into basically 24-hour care. Brad and I, my husband and I, moved in with my parents for 3 months, and they cared for me while he was working during the day. And then I look back, it was so intense and so just such a scary, scary time in my life that I had brought myself there, like in a way I carried such a burden of how did I do this? How did I get myself here? And the fact was it was my depression, and never knowing how to deal with, deep longings and sad, deep feelings, you know, had made me very susceptible to finding my own solution. And I tried it in my eating disorder, and almost took my own life in that sense. The doctor was very concerned that I was going to have a heart attack, you know, and so I went into recovery. I was diagnosed, like I said, with clinical depression and anorexia, and started basically what was a 3.5 year long journey of recovery and counseling. I went into an outpatient-based eating disorder program, amazing program that exists for adults who can't commit to, say, going into a group home or something, you know, on location. And so they provide you with a doctor, a nutritionist, and a counselor. So you start that journey. And it took 3.5 years. And strangely enough, like about 3 years into it, I would say I was no closer to recovering than I had been right at the beginning. If in a way I had learned to live with my own thoughts and my own negativity longer. And so it was still pretty pervasive. And it wasn't until I genuinely realized I am totally out of control, like totally out of control. I've been controlling this now for 3 years, nowhere close to recovery, you know, rock bottom, not loving my life, not really looking forward to a future that I remember, like, everyone said, you know, once you start eating, then you can deal with the real issues. And I'd be like, okay, thanks. You know, and I'm like, I've been dealing with my real issues for 3 years. Okay, you don't understand what you're talking about. But the one thing I hadn't tried was eating like a normal person, a full meal plan. And I remember just in a way having this argument with God, and God, I was like, God, please, like, what is going on? I'm still so depressed. And I said, you know, and remember him pretty gently just kind of saying, you know, in my heart, in my mind, it doesn't actually talk to me, you know, but actually like thinking he was saying to me, but you haven't tried food. Like, you haven't actually tried eating a full day's worth, you know, and I'd had 1 day here and maybe 2 days there, a full meal plan. And I was just like, what? No, but I've been dealing with all the sadness from my childhood, and I've been dealing with all of, you know, the things that I hate about myself, and, you know, and it was like, but you're still not eating.
Oh.
And I was like, fine. So bad. Fine, I'll eat them, you know? And so then I'm like, okay, meal plan, check, you know. And I also at the same time got the opportunity to direct a show. Someone came to me, this was sort of the start of my directing career. I'd only been an actor, performer, and then a teacher. Someone said, would you be interested in directing this show? I didn't even like the show. It was like one of my least favorite shows, but I'm like, yes, I'll do it. But it was actually under the agreement that I would stay on my full meal plan because they knew my history. And so part of me is like, yeah, fine, yeah, totally. Because I had been having this agreement with God. It was like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, I'm doing it, yeah. And the show was Little Shop of Horrors, and it actually ended up being like the most perfect parallel to my eating disorder. How, you know, Seymour starts off with this plant that talks to him, and it's like, isn't this cool? Like, this is making me feel good. People are giving me a bit of attention because he's cool, you know, but the side little bad part of it is that the plant requires blood to feed itself. And so Seymour at first, you know, is just doing just a little bit, giving it a little bit, you know, and the payoff is so great. People are paying attention to him. I remember people like, have you lost weight? Like, you look so great. And then you feel better about yourself. But then at the same time, you're like, what was I, humongous before? Like, if I look so great now, did I look terrible then? You know, and so it was this double-edged sword. And so what happens is you get some attention, and then it's like, oh, then that attention's gone. And so Seymour, what he does is he has to feed him more. And so he has to give him more blood. And the plant goes bigger and more interesting. And people are like, wow, this plant is amazing. But nobody knows that Seymour's making this sacrifice in order to keep this plant alive. And what ends up happening is he's just like, no, you know what? Like, I didn't mean for this to happen, and I'm sorry, you know, but I can't do this with you anymore. And the plant's like, well, who are you without me? Like, oh, you're just going to go back to being yourself, you know, normal, geeky, loser Seymour, you know? And then he's like, he realizes, oh yeah, I can't do that. So then he finds a way. He figures out a way to do it, not with his own blood. It's kind of whacked. But the amazing thing is the plant just grows bigger and bigger and bigger. And as I directed it, I was just like, this is exactly my story, and this is my eating disorder. And so through the eating, through directing the show, I finally was eating. Then all of the real issues came up. So the doctors were right. I wasn't, you know, and so, yeah, I started really looking at, the real issues that were coming up, the depression, and I went on medication, and that helped quite a bit. Actually, it took a couple different medications to find one that really clicked with me, but that definitely gave me some ground. My serotonin levels were so low, you know, having been depleted for 4 years at that point. And so that sort of gave me a boost, and I started doing counseling and eating, and that really helped me work through a lot of my issues. So I am one of the really extremely fortunate people who 100% full recovery. I was able to move away completely from the idea of moral eating and not feel guilty about stuff. And one of the things that really helped was I actually got pregnant with my son shortly after. I think it was my 6-month mark of like full recovery, full eating, and I got pregnant, and I was scared, very scared. I'm like, oh, I'm going to put on a bunch of weight. I'm like, it's okay. But my pregnancy was great. And then once he was born, he was like, he's a beast. He was huge when he was born, and he was just hungry all the time. And so I was hungry all the time, and it did not matter what was in front of me. I'm like, yeah, I'll eat it. Okay, yeah. Okay, what's that? Yeah, I'll eat it, because my body needed it, right? And through that, I learned how to eat again. Like, I learned how to just listen to my body and go, oh, I need some vegetables. I just need, you know, oh, I really need, you know, like to feel hunger again, and to eat because I'm hungry, and to stop when I was full, you know. So that was a real blessing in my life too. I think it was a huge part of kind of solidifying my recovery. So yeah. Did I just talk for 45 minutes straight?
Totally. That's what I love about you.
I don't know how to talk.
My job really easy. That's awesome. Well, we'll end this segment, and then I hope you'll cook through, and we'll keep hearing about Lalainia's story and talk further.